Tower of London from 1939 Universal.
Now, this was a little bit chilling and a little bit shocking, I suppose, especially for the time. It wasn't a horror movie. It's one of the Universal things in the package where they say, it's...
They released 52 horror movies called Shock Theater that went out to all the theaters and later on the TV shows. I remember I used to watch a TV show called Shock Theater from Dayton. It had Dr. Creep was the host. It was very cool.
Yeah.
But they showed all these old movies and a lot more. But it was called Shock Theater. And it was all the famous Universal horror movies and a few that didn't quite fit in there. Like 2 weeks ago we watched Night Key that we both kind of liked even though it really wasn't horror.
Mm-hmm.
This also really wasn't horror.
And we didn't like it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Director Rowland V. Writer Robert N. Lee, not Robert E. Lee.
No, it's got the horror people in it.
Stars Basil Rathbone, Boris Karloff, Barbara O'Neill, and a very young Vincent Price.
Third movie appearance.
Yeah,
he was
only done 2 things before this.
Well, just youngster. He was in his 30s, but
young for him, considering how old he got.
Yeah. It took me a few minutes to recognize him.
I was expecting him. It's one of the reasons I wanted to watch this one. Because we knew it wasn't horror going into it this time. So in 1471, Edward IV has violently deposed feeble old King Henry VI and now holds him prisoner. Sort of based on true events, sort of based on Shakespeare's play.
Loosely based on the Shakespeare.
Very loosely.
And which was very loosely based on history. So, sort of real people, sort of real events.
Based on a story suggested by history.
Yeah.
We start off with Boris Karloff as Mord, the executioner.
The man of 500 faces.
He's getting ready to execute Lord Devere.
And I am impressed with how distinctly different he was able to make himself look.
Yeah.
Here he's
bald
and
more
got
or less
a hawkish nose. His nose was different.
I thought that was his real nose.
No, it was a prosthetic piece.
It's a pretty good nose then.
Yeah, boldened up the eyebrows a bit more, and distinctly different look.
Recognizable though, unlike some of his characters.
Yeah.
So there's an interminably long scene where they all prepare for the execution, and at long last, Karloff removes Devere's head. Chop.
Yeah. But it's 1939, so there's no blood, and it's pretty tame as far as the special effects and so forth. There's not gore.
There's no blood at all.
Yeah.
Which is odd when somebody loses their head.
Hmm.
After things wrap up with the execution, we see that the king's brother Richard has little dolls that represent all his enemies in a little cupboard. He explains to us that all of these men are between him and the throne.
And he's, sixth in line at this point?
Yeah, there's a few ahead of him.
Yeah, he's going to work on that.
So if you ever watched a movie or a TV show where the villain has the little dolls in the cupboard, they just had it first.
Yeah.
Richard and Edward need to solidify an alliance, so they force Wyatt to marry the Duchess of Norfolk, even though he is betrothed to Alice.
The politics were a little complicated, the intrigues and the...
You don't really need to understand the politics.
Yeah.
Wyatt, you're going to marry this old lady, and Wyatt doesn't want to.
Yeah.
He refuses, so Edward threatens to remove his head and plans to follow through with it. But Wyatt breaks free from the guards, and Mord tackles him easily. It's actually the most physical I've ever seen Boris Karloff get. He tackled the guy and wrestled him to the ground.
Yeah, it wasn't a stunt double. He was really doing it. Yeah.
The Duke of Wales then attacks, and Richard and Edward see it as an opportunity. They trick the unstable old king into leading the battle with the assumption that someone is going to cut him down.
In the battle, the choreography of the fight battle was something else. I mean, it's like the director said, okay, now you're on this side and you're on this side, and just go together and clang your weapons together and make some rattling noises. Clang, 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 clang.
Large scale, though, lots of people, lots of extras.
There was, a lot of extras. But
So the old king doesn't even realize they'll be fighting against his own son. There's a great big battle with hundreds of extras fighting each other. Richard defeats Wales in single combat. The old king is confused, but survives the battle. Old King Henry comes home a hero, but Mord kills him on Richard's orders. Richard then removes one of the dolls from his little throne room diorama and burns it.
He didn't have a maniacal laugh while he was doing it, though. Yeah, he just kind of grinned.
The king and Richard scheme to fix it so that Anne, the widow of Wales, can only be spared if she marries Richard. This builds up Richard's power to the point where it takes power and money away from the Duke of Clarence, played by Vincent Price. Clarence threatens, You'll be sorry. Clarence then starts plotting revenge. Only he says it in Vincent Price's voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't a very good impression.
It was vaguely. Yeah.
Mord hears about the conspiracy from one of his little birds, who quickly arrests Clarence.
Yeah, he's kind of like the minister of propaganda and executioner and, general henchman for this guy.
Game of Thrones fans, figure Varys if he had a big axe.
Yeah, yeah.
And he hears about the conspiracy and quickly arrests Clarence. Richard challenges... Yeah?
Drinking contest.
Yeah, Richard challenges Clarence to a drinking contest to win his freedom. Clarence, who's constantly drinking, is eager to take up the challenge. Clarence wins, but Richard and Mord drown him in a huge barrel of wine.
And he didn't even really win. He was faking it. He wasn't nearly as drunk as he pretended to be.
And they didn't even need to have the drinking contest to
do
that.
Didn't. No, he was just being sadistic and...
One more doll taken down.
Mm-hmm. One step closer to the throne.
The following year, King Edward gets very sick and dies. Mm-hmm. Before he dies, he pardons Wyatt, who is now free to return to the castle. One of Edward's sons will succeed him, but Richard is named his protector until the son comes of age. He tricks the old queen into allowing the young king's brother to come stay with them. The queen suspects that this is just a ploy to kill them both, but she's got nothing to say about it. She's got no say in this. It is. It's very clear, yeah.
They kill kids in this. Yeah. They don't show it, but, yeah. It's kind of brutal and shocking, and so it's it's kind of horrifying, horrific, but
a lot of people die.
Not horror, no. But,
The Queen conspires with Wyatt to steal the treasure from the Tower of London, which they do very easily. Very easily.
And the treasure is like the royal jewels, and they open these treasure chests, and it's just this jumble of stuff.
Piles
it's not
of
on
jewelry
display or
necklaces,
protected or anything. It's just thrown in there.
They capture Wyatt and torture him. Alice comes down the chimney and gives Wyatt a file to work on the chains. That night, Wyatt escapes. In retaliation, Richard has Mord take the two young princes to the tower. Mord then kills both of them. Finally, the only doll in the box is Richard's own. On the other hand, Wyatt takes the treasure to Richard's enemy, Henry Tudor, who plans to retake the kingdom. There's another big battle. Henry kills Richard, and then Mord. Afterward, Wyatt and Alice get married and live happily ever after. The end.
Yeah. Mord was kind of reluctant about killing the boys.
He had second thoughts, but he did it.
But he went through with it because, why was he so dedicated to this guy, though?
Because he had the club foot, and he was kind of a cripple, and maybe he should have been executed himself, or thrown out and exiled from the village, the way they do.
Gave him money and power.
He gave him a
prestige
chance.
And, good career.
So anyway, I didn't even notice until the end that Richard has a hunchback. He is the Shakespearean Richard III.
But it's real subtle. It's
Yeah. Mord has a clean-shaven head and is clearly also the master of whispers as he gets information and gives orders to his little birds.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, Karloff really does have very little to do here, as Mord isn't much more than a background character.
Mm-hmm.
Still, he bears a lot of similarities to a certain Game of Thrones character.
More brutal, but yeah. Didn't
get burned up by spoilers.
And he didn't tell you every 10 minutes that he's a eunuch.
We recently rewatched Game of Thrones, and every single time Varys comes on the screen, somebody mentions
brings it up. Either he brings it up or somebody brings it up. You never forget that
he's
a eunuch.
Never forget that. I don't think we heard about Tyrion being a dwarf as many times.
Yeah.
There are a lot of extras in this movie, both in the battle scene and in the wedding scenes, and it all looks very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, it's no Game of Thrones. As far as non-horror Universal films go, I enjoyed The Night Key a few weeks ago, but this one, I was just waiting for it to end.
Yeah, mostly, yeah. Basil, is it Basil?
I think it's Basil.
The
spice is Basil, the man is Basil.
The man is Basil. Basil's performance as Richard was pretty amazing as far as acting goes. Just every step being measured and, every line you could tell he was calculating, playing the long game to get the game, to win the Game of Thrones.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. And he does sort of win for a while.
Yeah, maybe I'm giving my age away here, but when I was little in the 70s, before DVDs and videotapes and all that, we were given, my parents bought me records, big old 33 RPM records with horror stories on them. You remember any of those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
One of the ones I had a segment on. It was like a collection of horror stories one of them was about the Tower of London, and how the Queen would have people sent up there to be executed, and their ghosts all stayed behind.
Haunted.
The treasure was there, but so were all the ghosts. It was a good story. They could have done something like that for this.
Well, there's
really very little to do with the Tower of London.
Tower of London 1962 version with Vincent Price again that I think is more along those lines.
With ghosts and actual horror. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll probably get to that eventually.
This had no ghosts.
No ghosts.
Yeah.
No monsters.
Yeah. Overall, I'd say give it a watch.
If you want to.
Yeah. But don't
Universal, completionist, you gotta watch it. For entertainment value, if you want horror, no.
Yeah.
If you just want to watch a movie, sure, why not?
And Vincent Price hadn't discovered horror yet.
Very young Vincent Price. That was interesting.
That comes soon after this, but his initial works weren't horror.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, even in the ones later on, like in The Fly, he wasn't the villain or the monster. He was just a guy in that movie.
Well, but horror movies.
Yeah.